Hi there, I'm Amy.
And I'm Sue.
And we're the mother-daughter duo behind Chatter Matters.
Each week, we're going to be chatting through everyday challenges and how we navigate them as two women from different generations.
So get yourself comfy, grab your cup of tea or coffee, and let us show you why Chatter Matters.
Welcome to Chatter Matters.
Welcome to another episode, everyone.
Another week has flown by.
Another week has absolutely flown by, and we're on number 17 now.
Can't believe that, Amy.
I know. That's
17 episodes we've done.
Nearly 4? No. Is my maths right? Is that nearly 4 months?
Something like that.
Is that maths?
Yeah.
16 divided by 4 is 4.
Yeah.
So therefore 4 months. Wow.
She does maths.
She does. She's a woman in STEM. What can I say?
So this week we thought we might do a little bit more of a how-to.
Yeah.
How do you, we've talking about chatting matters.
Yeah.
And a lot of the questions that we get from people that listen to our episodes, like, how do you? So we thought we might do more of a how-to episode.
Because one of the key things that we always talk about, right, is creating a safe space and trust. So we kind of thought, why don't we break down those two concepts? What are they? How do we use them? And what do you need to, if you're sort of trying to have a conversation with someone, particularly in your family, how will you leverage those two kind of concepts in a way that will help you have a good conversation?
Yeah, and then how do you build them over time?
Yeah.
Because they're not, it is something that you consciously need to be, in the way that you show up will either build safety and trust or it will erode safety and trust. So it's not like a one and done thing.
No, it's not something that just sort of appears naturally. It requires effort and input to create. But I guess the reason why I personally am quite excited for this episode is I feel like I'm going to get to watch you be in your element more than any other episode, because this is something that you do as part of your job. This is one of the things you're, dare I say it, an expert in.
Yeah, I'm not sure we go that far, but it is certainly when I'm working in organisations, particularly working with teams, creating a safe space, a psychologically safe space, is an important facet of having a high performing team, and then also building trust. So the two go hand in hand, and I do talk about them quite a lot and work with them quite a lot within organisations.
Yeah. So how, when you're explaining or introducing the concept, I guess, of let's start with psychological safety.
Yeah.
How do you describe it when you're with a team or in an organisation?
Yeah. So I have a sort of a framework. So I have a consultant's good old triangle. We whip it out. It's either a triangle, like a Venn diagram,
or some form of equation,
or a 2x2 or something. So typically I would talk about there's 4 levels to safety. So level 1 being inclusion. So do I feel like I belong? Do I feel like I can be with these people and I feel included? The next level is then about learning. So do I feel like I can make mistakes? Do I feel like I'm safe to learn here? The third level will be about contribution. So do I feel like I'm valued and that what I bring is valued by others? Yeah. And then the 4th level is around challenge, which is the level that most organisations struggle with, is actually, do I feel safe enough to challenge the status quo, particularly if my voice is different from others, if I feel a bit marginalised? Is it safe enough for me to say things that might be unpopular? Yeah.
And so I guess then bringing it into the world of personal relationships, and I'm thinking specifically in a family dynamic, a parent-child dynamic.
Yeah.
How do you see that showing up? I guess the first, for me, I think my initial reaction, that whole inclusion, belonging, I think is a really interesting one to kind of start with. Of, for me, that's the care. Do I just feel loved? Do I feel unconditionally loved by my parent? Yeah. Would probably where I would start with that one.
Yeah, I think it's belonging. It's sort of do I feel like I belong here?
Am I included? Are you included in family dinners? And silly little examples like that, right? Of
and also things like values. Do we have the same value set, that I feel like I'm safe here, or does it just feel weird? Like, do I not feel like we have the same sort of value set, or we see the world in the same way? I think that can also make people feel excluded.
Yeah.
So I think belonging is really important.
And would that be the
safety.
bottom of your triangle, like the first step?
Exactly. That's the kind of first step. I mean, I think ultimately in a personal relationship, in a family, it's can I speak up? Can I say what I want to say without fear of judgment, without fear of somebody shouting at me, without fear of excluding, being cast aside, from my family. So can I be all of who I want to be, say what I want to say without there being some sort of negative implication to what I'm doing? And if the answer is yes, then you have a psychologically safe space. If you're worried that what you say, there might be some sort of negative reaction to it, then you probably don't feel safe.
Yeah. And so that, I guess that's the holistic picture, isn't it, across all four of those levels? Yeah,
I think so. And I think particularly in family dynamics as well. I mean, I know it was really difficult. I remember the dreaded Brexit conversation,
of course, with Pops.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very close relationship with my dad, but I could not talk to him. I could not talk to him about Brexit because I just did not feel safe.
Yeah.
That I could express a different point of view to his.
Well, it wasn't an option really, was it? Like, it was, he had his opinion, and that was the opinion.
Yeah.
There was no entertaining any kind of conversation, let alone a nuanced conversation, but it wasn't a conversation. So I can imagine just not feeling like you could bring up something other than.
And I think many people found that in families. I think it really did tear quite a few families apart. I think generally politics can. It's partly where I was into that sort of values and worldview bit, that sometimes just because you see the world in a slightly different way, you might not feel as safe in your family. As if you have a homogenous view of the world.
So I think that's a really good example to pick then, right? Like political differences. If we were to like take an example of how would you create a safe environment to have a conversation around politics, because I think that's a perfect example of something which that very first step could be completely different, right? How would you go about if say you and I had, potentially, why don't we use the example with Pops around Brexit? Like, if we were to go back in time and it's 2016, what retrospectively potentially would you have done to create a psychologically safe environment? And I think I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit with my thought processes going, but also you're the child in that dynamic. So like, I guess we're going to come at this from, I'm thinking of structure as I'm going, but we're going to come at it from two different things. I think one, that's a really interesting one to start with. As a child, how do you initiate a psychologically safe space with your parent? And then we'll do a flip side of, as a parent, how do you create it with your child?
I mean, I was a grown-up when the Brexit thing was, but he was still my dad. And You're still in that
parent-child dynamic.
You are, yeah, even though I'm an adult and I'm skilled in this space. I mean, I think some of it you have to call your shots. I mean, I genuinely thought that it was a fruitless endeavour. Yeah. That actually it would
do more harm than good.
And it would have a detrimental impact on our relationship. So there was choice about just not going there and not entertaining it, because my relationship with him was more important than to have a big blow up over different opinions on what's right and what's wrong, because I could also be wrong, and he could be right, so
I think that's a good point actually, of like measuring how important is this topic to discuss versus the relationship that you have with them. And then maybe dynamics like this one where you go, actually, you know what? This is one we're going to leave. And, But like if you were wanting to step into that space.
I think so much of it is framing it up. It's like framing up the conversation that you would like to have and contracting on how you would like to have that conversation.
how would you explain contracting a little bit more for me?
So it's like almost having an agreement on how do we want to have this conversation. So it's not having the conversation.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's signposting. I would like to have a conversation with you about Brexit or about a political point of view, something I don't agree with. I would like to have that conversation with you, but I'd like to have it in a way that we could both listen and be respectful, that we probably have got different opinions on this, but I would love to learn from you, and I would hope that you would give me the same respect that you would want to listen and learn from me. So that's the contracting piece.
And what I love about what you did there as well is you're giving the why of why you want to have the conversation. So it's not just, you're not just discussing for discussing's sake, or you're not just bringing up something contentious just to have a contentious conversation, because I think that's something that can be really tricky, particularly with politics, but with lots of things where people have that fundamental difference of opinion, is sometimes you will fall into the trap of someone bringing something up just to be a little bit controversial, or just to dig up something, whereas actually having the why you want to have the conversation as part of that contract, I think is really, really helpful.
And I think one of the things that I witness with parenting, which breaks down safety, is when you shut your children down, when you diminish that they might have a slightly different opinion to you, and it might be done in a banter, it might be done with banter, but actually you are closing down someone else's perspective rather than allowing your child to express something different in a way that they would like to express it. I think that for me is a parenting mistake that I see. Like if I'm out and about and I'm listening, because I'm on my own a lot, I sit in cafes and I sit in restaurants and I might, I'm overhearing in an airport, on an aeroplane, I'm overhearing parenting and and that for me is I can get out, don't do that. When I can hear the mother or the father just shutting their child down. That for me just breaks the safety that I can't, as a child, it's basically saying I can't say what I want to say because it's not okay.
And for our parents out there, how early did you start sort of doing some form of signposting contracting with my brother and I as kids, or how early would you start?
Oh, pretty early. I mean, even like the naughty step.
Oh yeah.
It would be this behavior is not acceptable. And therefore I need you to go and sit on. I didn't need to do it very often because you were both very good, but there were moments when I would no, what you've just done now is not okay. That behavior is not okay. But it would still be the same thing, which is signposting why I am disciplining right now, and my expectation of what you will do and your behavior when you're sitting on the naughty step is not to move. It's to think about why you're there, and then we'll have a conversation about it afterwards. So I think very young I was framing and contracting around expectations before we actually talked about what you had done. That was wrong.
Well, and I think that for me, I think is one of the big takeaways, right? Is that the way that you may contract with an adult, the way that you would signpost a trickier conversation as an adult is going to be more nuanced than it is with a child, and it's going to have a different time frame. And I think that's what I'm picking up with you, is actually when you're little and you're trying to have a trickier conversation with a kid, maybe they've done something wrong, or they've said something hurtful and they didn't quite realize what they said was hurtful, is actually you might just need to give them some time to actually think about it, because the mental processing is not going to be as quick as you are as an adult. And
explaining why the conversation is important. So the impact that you had on somebody else, or the impact that you had on yourself or on me. So I think quite early on, I think you can use those techniques.
Nice. So flicking back, I guess, to so we've set the scene and we've started the contracting, which I guess what sounds like sort of sets the foundation, the bedrock of the conversation. As you're going through, what do you do as you're going through a conversation to maintain that sense of safety?
A lot of it is listening, which you and I have spoken a lot about, and seeking to understand rather than prove yourself that you're right. Even if you disagree with what the other person is saying, I think giving them the respect and the respect to just listen to their point of view I think I've learned over the years that nobody is 100% right in anything, and there will always be a grain of truth in whatever the other person is saying. So I think listening is a massive skill and tool to build safety and to hold. I think you and I've talked before about holding the space, which is actually but that requires you to be 100% present. It's not thinking about what you want to say. It's not thinking about the dinner that you're going to cook. It's genuinely being with that person 100%, giving them all of your attention, even if it's just listening. So that's, I think, in terms of safety, that's the biggest. And then encouragement for the other person to share what they want to share and express their feelings in the way that they want to express them. I think for me, there's safety is around you being okay with all of whatever the other person brings. And that might be anger and it might be upset, but you can hold it and you're okay with it.
You can not agree with it.
Totally.
And you can feel potentially hurt by it, or like the emotions I think are very different from, like, the emotions that you feel through the conversation are separate to the way that you show up in the conversation. Would be how I would distinguish it, of like, if you had turned, if we were having a tricky conversation and you said something that kind of hurt my feelings, or that I just fundamentally disagreed with and made me upset, that's not a unsuccessful conversation. No, not at all. Like there's the psychological safety is not that nobody ever disagrees with each other. Absolutely. It's not that nobody ever treads on toes slightly. Obviously, I think a bedrock of all of this is respect. And, if you've got someone being disrespectful, fundamentally that's ruining the psychological safety. But just because you can be having a discussion where you don't agree or you're getting heated or whatever, and it still be a safe space. I think I've had some fantastic, like, I've got a friendship group where we can have some fantastically heated conversations. And I can get upset in those conversations as we're like, batting an idea back and forth. But I still feel very safe in order to show my emotion and get upset and go like, actually, you know what? This is making me really angry. And going, you know what? Actually, I think my anger means that I'm not speaking clearly and I'm not getting my point across well enough. So why don't we take a pause on this? And then we can come back when we're a little bit. I mean, I think if you don't have difficult conversations, it's normally a sign that there isn't enough safety. If you go back to the framework that I was talking about, which is the top is challenge. I think if you're not challenging each other, then you're probably not speaking everything that you would like to say, and therefore probably aren't as safe as you could be if you've got a group of friends where you can. Nice. I think there's something in there that I think we should store away for the listeners and do another episode on is on active listening. And what does that look like? Because I think that's we could go on to that for a whole other episode, and I want to put a pin in that one, and we'll come back to that because I think psychological safety is the foundation, right? Active listening is the action that goes inside of it. Exactly. Which I think is separate to psychological safety. They work in tandem. But... And it's probably, and again, in terms of the work that I do in organisations, I think it's the most underrated skill that a human being has. I think it is a skill that is just useful in all walks of life, in all situations, is being able to listen, deeply listen. Agreed. Should we talk about trust? I was just going to say that's where I was going to move us on to next, which was, okay, so we've got the bedrock, right, of psychological safety, but what you were saying was that trust, like, they work hand in hand. I guess twofold question is, how do you see them working hand in hand, but also, like, how do you see trust? Because I feel like there's a very, I trust you. Like I in my mind, I'm like I trust you. That's the definition of trust, is that I trust you. But like, what actually? It's because it's a little bit more. It's hard to unpack. It's a little more intangible. I think it's one of those concepts that's just a touch. Again, when I'm working within an organisation, in order to create more tangibility to it, I often use an equation, which is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy is how you build trust over
self-interest, self-orientation. So if an individual, and everyone will know it when they're listening to this podcast, if an individual feels like they're just out for themselves, and are just on their own agenda, only want to talk about themselves, not really interested in the other person, trying to drive their career above everything else, then that will erode trust faster than anything. Most organisations' credibility and reliability can take a little bit more time, and it's intimacy in an organisation that isn't given enough attention. So a lot of the time I will work with helping teams become more intimate with each other, which of course they go, funny word to use in business. But what it means is that we'll invest and build deep relationships with each other. So we actually genuinely care about each other. We understand each other. And that for me is about having intimate relationships. It goes beyond just doing business with each other. It's actually understanding each other's hopes and dreams, understanding each other's vulnerabilities. That for me is what an intimate relationship is.
Okay, so I think that makes so much sense from an organisational setting, but if we do what we did with the psychological safety and like bring it into personal relationships, because you and I were talking about this beforehand and you were like, I'm not sure the trust equation's quite what we're looking for here. And I was like, no, I do think it is. I think it is. I think, should we tackle the easier ones first? Which I think, funnily enough, in a personal relationship, intimacy is the easiest one to frame up.
Yeah. And that, it's about, do we have strong rapport? Do we care? Do we love? Each other, so I think, but interestingly, if you look at a lot of marriages, that break down or go to counselling, it's because they've distanced and stopped being intimate with each other, and I don't just mean having sex, I mean genuinely listening to each other, spending quality
it's the
time.
Emotional intimacy, isn't it?
And quality time, with each other. So I think that one definitely is a big part, and with your children as well, having intimate time with your children, whether that's at bedtime or whether it's going for walks or whether it's watching them, driving them to football matches or netball matches. Those are all opportunities for intimacy. And it
is, what you were saying earlier, like it's the showing you care.
Yeah.
It's the care element for me of like, that's the, that for me is what the intimacy piece is all about in my mind.
And love.
Yeah. And love.
Yeah, and love.
And so then I think reliability would be the next easiest to describe.
I think that's massive. Parents, just showing up.
Yeah.
Just showing up. And that's showing up at the dinner table and not being distracted.
Yeah, because that's something that when I was little, both my brother and I had a conversation with you and Dad.
Yeah.
Because both of you worked at the same company and you just used to talk about work over the table, or you would be upstairs working and wouldn't sometimes come down to the dinner table. And I remember that's my like defining moment one of my defining moments as a child was actually having that conversation with you going, can you guys not talk about work at the dinner table? And like, can you make sure you come to dinner because that's really important to me? And you did. And you did, which is the reliability piece. It's the showing up. But I do think like it is, again, and tying back to psychological safety, we're kind of getting into why it ties together, is I felt like I could speak up. I felt like I could make that as an ask. And you respected me enough and my brother enough to make that happen. Yeah.
And that, and that's also turning up to speech days, sports days,
prize giving when you're
7
years old.
I remember one of my biggest downers that I have on when I was parenting was when I first started up the business. My son was doing like a little obstacle course, and he was only 3. And I was sat outside taking a coaching call, and it overran. And I'd parked outside so I could literally run in as soon as it finished, and it overran. And when I got there, he'd already finished. I was mortified. And it still sits with me now. And then, I mean, they were very good in the nursery because they let him do it again so that I could watch him. He probably doesn't even remember this.
I didn't even know that was something that had happened.
But that for me was you didn't show up. You weren't there. You weren't reliable. He wanted you to be there and you weren't there.
And I think that's the important thing, because it's not just about always showing up. It's showing up when you've said you will. Because you have adult lives to deal with. You have work to deal with. You have other commitments. And I think, like if I think about for me, you as a parent, and it's not as binary as this, but like it was quality over quantity. And it's not that you weren't there, but it's like you had business trips to go to, and you were running a business, and you had other things competing for your time. But what I always knew that if you said you were going to be there, you were going to turn up and you were going to be fully present, and actually, and I felt like you wanted to be there as well.
Which of course I did. So it is about keeping your promises.
Yeah.
I think reliability is about that.
And so the one that you and I were sort of slightly disagreeing on before we got into this episode was the credibility one. And I think the reason why I do still think it is relevant, it just doesn't, I don't think it doesn't look like credibility looks in an organisation. For me, credibility in an organisation is I've proven experience in this, I have a certificate, I have an accreditation, or I've dealt with a situation like this before. Interesting, that last one. I think that last one is how parents show credibility in these kinds of things. It's, like last week when we were talking about like our experiences at school, you were showing credibility to me of like, well, I had a tough time at school, and these were some of the experiences that I had that meant that I approached things in a slightly different way. And for me, that is a way a parent can show credibility. It's almost like credibility becomes disclosure, like credibility becomes vulnerability, because you're letting your child in on some of your life experiences, because as a kid you've got no idea what your parents been through. And I've loved, as I've got older, discovering more about your life. But I think if I think about when I first started dating, you showed me credibility by talking to me about some of the different dating experiences that you had, and and that in itself breeds trust, because it's like, oh my God, you've been through something like this as well. It's normal that I'm feeling like this, or it's not strange. And I think the other bit then is, if you've not had an experience that is directly related or relatable to what your child's going through, it's then that you do the research. And I think that's, again, it's when we were really little, you always did so much research into how to parent a boy, how to parent a little girl, and that's your credibility, is the what I don't know, I go and find out. So would be my argument. I'm putting my case that credibility does count.
I think that's fair. And I absolutely think disclosure, vulnerability is a massive way of building trust. Yeah. As long as it doesn't then become about you.
Well, and which leads us nicely onto the sort of divided by the, you can have all of these good things, but it can be taken away by self-interest and self-orientation. So I guess you're starting to go into that a little bit and what that looks like.
So I think if someone's coming to you, like we were talking about the schools last week, I can share a little bit about me, but the conversation is not about me. It's like you don't take up the airtime to spend all the time talking about yourself. Yeah. It needs to be balanced. But equally, if your child comes to you to talk about something, you can do some disclosure, but then don't spend the next half an hour talking about yourself. You know, it's like, just be back with them. The disclosure is a way of building trust. It's not about hijacking the agenda.
Yeah, and it's also, I think the other thing is, I think something that you and I have had to navigate as I've got older, and our relationship has taken on more elements of a friendship. We will always have a mother-daughter relationship, and that's what takes primacy. But as we've got older and have got closer as adults, that piece of not like keeping the boundaries right for a parent-child relationship of never like not
blurring them.
And I think the thing that you were just saying that I think was really important was like not just unloading. Going like, oh, you've just said something that potentially is triggering to me, or like brings up a great teaching moment, and let me tell you all about it. And it's like, there are moments, you've got to pick and choose how you bring those life experiences in with a child, and you're not projecting it onto them.
Totally. I think they do, safety and trust for me do go hand in hand. I think it's hard for you to build trust with disclosure and vulnerability if you haven't created a safe space.
and it's hard to have a safe space if you don't have trust. So it's like it's not a linear relationship.
Totally, and I think the more that you create safe spaces, the more you build trust, and the more you build trust, the more safe people feel. So they go hand in hand.
Exactly, and which is what we were talking about. Like, it's not something that just happens overnight. It's just something that is like incrementally built over time. And I think we are a fantastic example of having successfully done that throughout a lifetime. I guess I want to start with asking for, I guess, a little bit of how you might reflect on your childhood and your relationship with your parents. I know you've sort of said, like, on the Brexit thing that you didn't necessarily feel psychologically safe with Pops, but at like a macro level, how do you feel like your relationship with your parents was in the psychological safety and trust space, and was there anything that you then took from that into how you parent today?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, sorry, I really did dive in deep there.
No, it's a very big question, because I didn't feel safe with my mum.
Yeah.
And that was because she wasn't always mentally stable or available. I think I've talked already on here about...
talk in the self-help episode about that.
That mum had mental disorders. She had depression, schizophrenia. So I never felt 100% safe with her, because I wasn't quite sure what I was coming home to. Yeah. And I always felt like she needed to look after herself rather than look after me. So I didn't feel unsafe, but I didn't feel safe. Yeah. And I wouldn't have known that as a child, actually. It's only afterwards, in hindsight, you realise... You
can unpack that. And...
Yeah, I always I knew I always felt very independent, and I always knew I had to be sort of self-resourceful. And it's now that I look back at it and go, well, that's because I wasn't... Mum would do like the basics, like she would always cook a meal. Yeah. I would always have a clean house. There were things like that made the home safe. The home was not... She was not emotionally safe. Yes. Which therefore meant that I didn't share much of what was going on in my life, because I didn't feel like she could hold it. Yeah. So that was the role that Dad would need to play.
But I can imagine, with him being in the army, he's not always then physically there.
No.
So whilst he can hold that for you, with him not being there, means that it's not a constant in your childhood.
Yeah, and I felt like I grew up very quickly. Yeah. I don't often, when I go into therapy and I have therapeutic conversations, it's like I often don't feel like I've really had a child. I did have a childhood. Did I feel like I could be free and unabandoned? No. Was it full of joy and happiness? Probably not, because I always felt like there was a degree of control that I needed to have. So I don't know that, because of mum's instability, I didn't necessarily feel psychologically safe. Yeah. And I think to answer your question, how it shaped me is, I very much wanted to create that for you and your brother in a very conscious way. And even things like staying in one place so you could go to a school for the long period, like you talked about in the last episode, that you were there from 7 through to 18. I wasn't. I moved every 2 or 3 years. We were in Germany for about 6 years, which was the longest stint. So again, when you're moving and changing, your environment becomes unsafe. You have to start all over again. So there were aspects of my childhood that didn't feel safe. I trusted my parents. I definitely trusted them, but it was that with mum, it was that emotional stability that I felt like I was missing.
And I think the reason why I kind of wanted to ask that question is, I think there are some great tips in this of how do you build it for people who are still in a situation where that's a possibility. Whether that's parents who are wanting to build it with their children as they're growing up, whether it's adult children wanting to connect with their parents and that they feel like they can do that. I guess for me, I think there's also a piece here of like, and sometimes there are outside circumstances that mean that that's not necessarily possible. Yeah. And that's really, that could be heartbreaking. And there's a a grief to that. But I think what you demonstrate for me is going, okay, this is something that I didn't experience, but this is what I'm going to create.
Yeah.
And I think you carry that through in the work that you do. I think you carry it through in the friendships that you have, and then what you've done with my brother and I as a parent. So I think, you know, I'm sort of speaking to all the different scenarios that you might have, but I think, I think that's quite a powerful example of sometimes not everything goes the way that you want it to, or you would wish for it to be, but there are ways in which you can create that environment for yourself.
And I think the one person that you need to feel safest with the most is yourself.
Yeah.
You know, like, can I back myself? Can I trust myself? Do I feel safe with myself? And I have had moments of, they talk about the dark night of the soul, you know, when you hit some rock bottom stages and, you know, you're curled up in the fetal position and everything just feels too much. At those moments, have I got myself?
Yeah.
Can I trust myself to pull me out of this and to set me on the right track, and that I will look after myself and keep myself safe? Because I think fundamentally that's what I learned with not having it from my mum, was I needed to give it to myself. I needed to create a safe space for myself where I knew that I had myself. And that I'm very grateful for, because I think it gives you a strength and a stability that if you've never had to find that for yourself, I think you can maybe then be on slightly shaky, you know, on shaky ground.
No.
And I think that's the balance that I always felt parenting as well, is like, how do you create a safe space without cushioning and wrapping your child up in cotton wool, that you don't actually allow them to go out and have experiences that are unsafe, so that they can build their own sense of resilience and their own sense of trusting themselves.
Yeah, interesting. A fine line to tread. Fascinating. That's a potentially another interesting one to sort of unpack a bit more as well at some point.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely moments where you have not been safe.
No, yeah.
You know, and
because of decisions that I have made.
Exactly, you know, and of course, as a parent, your heart is in your mouth. But that's all part of life, and it's part of life's tapestry, and you are stronger for having gone
safer for it,
and safer having gone through those experiences.
No, absolutely.
So I think sometimes, you know, we're always looking outside. It's like, who do I find outside? But sometimes you have to give this to yourself too.
I like that. On that note, I reckon that's a good little wrap up there. I think that was really. I think you can probably tell from the strength of the way that we've spoken that it's something that I think both you and I feel quite passionately about, and I think, you know, it is. Yeah, I think it's so. For us, it's such a bedrock of our relationship that actually we're able to have these kind of conversations because we've put the work in to build the trust and the psychological safety, and to your point of, you know, I think we trust that we each have ourselves, you know, as in like, I know you can look after yourself, and if you know, we have a tricky conversation that we don't tie up perfectly with a bow, like, I know you've got the mental stability and strength and capability to look after yourself whilst we work it out. And I think the same goes for me, which I think also helps. Yeah,
completely. Because then there's you feel safe with each other.
Yeah,
like one's not having to hold the other one up.
Yeah,
which I think creates quite a strong bond then.
Absolutely.
Because like you're independently safe, but then also when you come together, you get the strength of that.
Yeah. Love that. Amazing. Well, hopefully this is something that is interesting to sort of I think we've tried to paint a picture for all the various types of scenarios where psychological safety and trust may come into it. But hopefully this was a good episode for everyone. And
and again, as always, if you would like Amy and I to talk about anything in more detail or depth, we would love to hear from you. Absolutely. And we'll be very happy to do that.
Amazing. Well, have a lovely week, everybody, and we will connect next Thursday.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.